Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. Bob Lazar was born on January 26, 1959 in Coral Gables, Florida, a sunny suburb better known for its palm-lined boulevards than secret government projects. His father worked as an engineer for a local aerospace contractor, and his mother taught high school chemistry. At home, model rockets and chemistry sets littered the garage, but there were no whispered tales of flying saucers, just a middle-class family encouraging curiosity. By age 12, Lazar was already dismantling transistor radios and devouring every physics book he could find. Friends remember him as that kid who lived in the future, sketching particle accelerator schematics on scraps of paper while the rest of the neighborhood played baseball. In high school, he excelled in math and physics, earning top marks and building makeshift Van de Graaff generators in his parents' garage. "I remember the spark jumping across my fingertips," Lazar later recalled in an interview, a line that would echo when he described far stranger machines decades later. Rumors circulated that he'd won national science fairs, but school records list no awards. Even then, small discrepancies began to trail Lazar's reputation. After graduation, Lazar claimed to have enrolled in graduate-level physics programs at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the California Institute of Technology. He spoke casually of working on subatomic particle experiments, using phrases like, "I ran those simulations at MIT," or "Caltech's materials lab was where I honed my skills." But when journalists pressed both institutions, administrators found no record of his attendance or degrees. Lazar's explanation was consistent. Classified work required untraceable records. "If they paid me to study secret physics," he said, "they wouldn't want transcripts floating around." Believers found that plausible. Skeptics saw a convenient alibi. Yet when Lazar took to the airwaves in 1989, his ease with equations and technical jargon gave him an air of authenticity. He spoke of gravity waves and electromagnetic fields with the precision of a seasoned researcher. Next, Lazar surfaced at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. Los Alamos, birthplace of the atomic bomb, is as real and regulated as it gets. Lazar said he joined as a physicist's assistant, handling what he called exotic materials and overseeing computer models for fusion experiments. Some colleagues recall a quiet man in his late 20s who knew his way around complex instrumentation. Others don't remember him at all. Official rosters list no Lazar, yet a handful of anecdotal memories offer a glimmer of support. Then came the turning point. Lazar described being approached by a mysterious intermediary, an unmarked car, a briefcase handed over in a parking lot, who told him of work more advanced than anything at the lab. In early 1982, he said he drove to a remote desert airstrip in Nevada. There were no signs, no security gates, just a hangar large enough to hide a DC-3, he recounted. Guards in dark uniforms took his wallet and watch. Later, his personal files were purged. In that moment, Bob Lazar, the engineer, vanished. In his place stood an operative for something far more secret. He called the site S4, a hidden complex carved into the side of a mountain just south of Area 51. Unlike the open tarmac and test runways of Groom Lake, S4 was cloaked in perpetual twilight, its entrances hidden behind false rock faces. Inside, Lazar claimed, were 9 craft, sleek, metallic discs unlike any aircraft on record. His job, reverse engineer their propulsion systems. Central to their power source, he said, was an elemental material he referred to as Element 115. According to Lazar, this substance did not occur naturally on Earth, but could be synthesized in supercolliders. When bombarded with protons, it produced a stable isotope capable of generating strong gravity amplification fields. "Imagine gravity as a rubber sheet," Lazar explained. Element 115 could pluck that sheet, sending ripples through space-time and allowing the craft to maneuver in ways that defy Newtonian physics. Within S4's dimly lit workshops, teams of technicians monitored glowing reactor cores, while others recorded data on oscilloscopes and punch card mainframes. Lazar described the hum of the reactors as like distant thunder, a soundtrack to a secret science that might revolutionize energy and transportation. Yet every description he offered only deepened the mystery. No patents, no peer-reviewed papers, no outside confirmation. In 1989, Lazar agreed to an anonymous interview on KLAS TV in Las Vegas using a voice scrambler and the pseudonym Dennis. The clip aired late at night, but it sparked a firestorm. Viewers tuned in to hear a man claim that the US government was hiding alien craft and secretly studying their technology. Within hours, international outlets had picked up the story. Lazar's face and real name would follow in subsequent interviews. The official response was swift and dismissive. The Air Force issued a statement denying any knowledge of Lazar or S4. The Department of Energy stated no records existed of him at Los Alamos. Skeptics pounced on every inconsistency. No diplomas, no lab badges, no corroborating witnesses. Some called him a con artist or hoaxer seeking attention. Others accused mainstream media of lazy journalism for failing to verify basic facts. Yet despite the barrage of denials, Lazar's detailed descriptions of hangar layouts, security checks, and technical schematics captivated many. UFO enthusiasts cited his story as the smoking gun they'd long awaited. Scientists, meanwhile, criticized his lack of verifiable data. They argued that creating element 115, even in trace amounts, would require massive particle accelerators and yield split-second lifetimes, nothing like the stable isotope Lazar described. Back in civilian life, Lazar faced intense scrutiny. His phone lines were tapped, reporters prowled his neighborhood, government agents loitered near his home. He turned to business ventures, opening a small electronics repair shop, dabbling in photographic equipment, and made sporadic public appearances at UFO conferences. Throughout it all, he held firm to his narrative that he'd seen alien technology in operation and that the truth was being buried. Today, Bob Lazar remains one of the most polarizing figures in UFO lore. Supporters celebrate him as a whistleblower who risked everything to reveal cosmic secrets. Skeptics dismiss him as a skilled raconteur whose story unravels under close inspection. And yet, the legend endures, fueled by a simple question. If he made it all up, why such depth of technical detail? And if he's telling the truth, what does that mean for humanity's place in the universe? As the sun sets over Nevada's Groom Lake and the desert winds whisper through hidden hangars, the debate continues. Somewhere deep inside that forbidding mountain may lie the answers, or perhaps nothing at all. The facts are shrouded in red ink classification stamps and buried in sealed vaults. But one thing is certain, Bob Lazar's story will keep pulling at our curiosity, daring us to peer beyond the veil. Next, we journey into the heart of S4 itself to see whether the labyrinthine corridors and humming reactors match the tales told, or if they remain forever out of reach. The road into Area 51 is little more than a dirt track meandering through arid scrubland, winding around low hills that blur the horizon. But Bob Lazar never traveled that path. Instead, he was driven along a hidden service road that forked off just beyond the town of Rachel, Nevada, past warning signs, beyond chain-link fences topped with razor wire, and into a part of the desert most people don't even know exists. This was S4, Lazar claimed, a clandestine facility carved into the side of a mountain, where the government stored and studied technology not of this world. From the outside, S4 looked like an unremarkable cluster of rock faces and gravel parking lots. At first glance, each entrance appeared to be nothing more than a solid granite outcropping. But embedded in the stone were 9 individual blast doors, each weighing tens of tons and concealed behind realistic rock paneling. During the day, the panels blended seamlessly with the mountainside. At night, powerful floodlights bathed the false rock in a harsh yellow glow, revealing faint seams at the entrances to underground workshops. Lazar described arriving at S4 in the pre-dawn hush of early winter 1982. He recalled the gray-blue tint of the sky and the sudden quiet that fell as he drove past the last civilian checkpoint. It was like the world paused for a moment, he said in a later interview. Guards in black uniforms boarded the vehicle, their faces obscured by mirrored visors. They took his watch, his wallet, even his wedding ring, sealing each item in an evidence bag for safekeeping. Only then did the car roll through a gate that vanished seconds later behind a heavy steel slab. Once inside, Lazar was escorted through a series of antechambers. a series of dimly lit corridors lined with bullet-resistant glass and surveillance cameras. He passed technicians in white lab coats peering at oscilloscopes, engineers hunched over drafting tables, and security personnel scanning phosphorescent badges with handheld scanners. The ambient hum of air filtration units mingled with the low whir of computer tape drives and the distant thump of hydraulic lifts. Every sound was a reminder that this was a place built for secrecy and technological marvels. Lazar's assigned workspace was a cavernous hangar with a polished concrete floor divided into 9 bays. In each bay sat a saucer-shaped craft, sleek, metallic, and unlike anything in public aircraft registries. Some were as small as sports cars, others approached the size of a light plane. Each rested atop a tripod of support beams, the undersides exposed for inspection. Technicians moved about the crafts with laser pointers, noting surface anomalies and mechanical fittings. At one end of the hangar stood a series of disassembled reactor units, glowing cylindrical cores cradled in insulated frames, connected to power converters and diagnostic arrays. Lazar's title, he said, was Field Engineer Propulsion Systems. His job, to reverse engineer the anti-gravity drive. Every morning, he suited up in an unmarked lab coverall, imprint S4 on the breast pocket, and swiped a badge over a sensor pad. Access to each bay was logged by computer, timestamps, biometric scans, and even voice recognition. The clearance levels were tiered, meaning Lazar could see only those areas directly related to his work. Each door he approached required a live guard to verify his identity. In the first week, Lazar focused on layout and orientation. He mapped the internal structure of Bay 3, where the smallest of the 9 crafts was kept. He noted the diameter of the circular hull, the spacing of mounting brackets, and the placement of diagnostic ports along the rim. Using calipers and laser tape measures, he recorded dimensions to the nearest millimeter. He took hundreds of photographs, though none left the facility. Each review was done on encrypted terminals that wiped image data after 10 minutes. Yet it was the heart of the craft, the propulsion pod, that captivated him most. Each saucer contained a cluster of 3 reactor units arranged in a triangular formation, each core about the size of a human torso. The exterior shells were hot to the touch, despite no visible heat exhaust vents. Their surfaces pulsed with faint, wave-like patterns of light, as though channeling some unseen field. Lazar later described it as a living thing, humming with energy and vibrating at a frequency he could feel in his bones. To decipher how these reactors generated gravity, Lazar collaborated with a small team of theoreticians, physicists whose faces he never learned. They worked from closed-door offices overlooking the hangar floor, poring over theoretical models and handwritten notebooks full of tensor equations. Lazar was allowed to observe their discussions from an adjacent, glass-walled lab, taking notes on chalkboards scribbled with lines of Lagrangian mechanics and complex matrices. He saw references to closed-loop gravity amplification and subspace contact, but was told little about the experiment's ultimate aims. Security protocols at S4 were unlike anything Lazar had encountered at Los Alamos. He underwent daily medical evaluations, blood tests, neurological scans, and stress assessments, designed to make sure he was physically and mentally fit. Each evening, his movements were logged and his biometric data compared to morning baselines. Guards occasionally intervened, confiscating any personal notes that strayed into forbidden topics. They wanted to know exactly what we discussed, he said. I felt like I was part of a living cage. Despite the restrictions, Lazar managed to glean insights. By studying the reactor cores up close, he noticed minute channels etched into their outer casings, narrow slits that he hypothesized functioned as field emitters. He traced wiring looms that led to modular control units, suspecting that each was tuned to adjust local gravitational gradients. In session after session, he sketched diagrams of nested rings and coil assemblies, trying to reverse engineer the logic behind their construction. Working alongside Lazar were technicians and engineers whose allegiance seemed more to the project than to any military branch. They wore no insignia and rarely spoke beyond curt technical jargon. One afternoon, Lazar struck up a conversation with a woman monitoring a reactor console. She told him, in a hushed tone, that she'd been brought in after a stint on another black-budget project in Oak Ridge. They move us from one secret to another, she whispered. Nobody ever talks. We only calculate. Her eyes darted to a nearby camera and she snapped shut, never to speak of it again. As days turned into weeks, Lazar grew both exhilarated and uneasy. He found himself wandering the hangar at night, when cleaning crews had departed and the only lights were the reactor's gentle glow, listening to the hum that reverberated through the concrete cavern. On more than one occasion, he reported electrical anomalies, power spikes that surged through lights, causing them to flicker, or mysterious bounces on his radiation meter even after he'd cleared standard checklists. He logged these incidents in a secured notebook, but they were often dismissed by supervisors as equipment quirks. The atmosphere at S4 was part laboratory, part fortress. Guards roamed in armored vehicles on narrow cliffside roads that led to emergency exits. The facility's ventilation intakes were camouflaged as rock outcroppings, and its power supply came from buried lines connected to an obsolete reactor plant several miles away. Lazar never saw any aircraft take off or land. Transportation to and from S4 was exclusively by unmarked helicopter or escorted ground convoy. One of the most surreal moments came when Lazar was asked to help move one of the larger crafts from Bay 6 to Bay 9. The operation involved hydraulic ramps, magnetic clamps, and a team of 10 technicians working in unison. As the saucer hovered inches above the floor, apparently held aloft by its own gravity-nullifying field, he felt the floor vibrate beneath his feet. Security protocols dictated that only 5 people be in the bay, but somehow a dozen were present, all silently watching the machine glide. He later admitted it was the closest he ever felt to touching real extraterrestrial hardware. Throughout his tenure at S4, Lazar collected fragments of information hinting at a connection between element 115 and the craft's energy source. He learned that the element's nucleus could be excited by neutron bombardment, producing a subatomic reaction that warped local gravity fields. Yet when he asked about sample synthesis or mass production, he was met with evasive answers. That's not your concern, or you'll see it when it's ready. After roughly 3 months, Lazar was quietly reassigned back to Los Alamos under the guise of Project Rotation. His final report on propulsion anomalies was classified top secret, still inaccessible to public scrutiny. Before departure, he was debriefed in a windowless chamber, where senior officers admonished him to maintain discretion and warned that loyalty has its privileges and its consequences. When he left S4 for the last time, Lazar said he felt as though he'd spent half his life underground, entranced by the machines, haunted by what he'd glimpsed, and branded by the secrecy that engulfed him. The bomb-like clank of the blast doors sealed behind him, and the desert night swallowed the facility whole once more. At the time, Lazar understood this experience as the pinnacle of his technical career. He believed the discoveries he'd witnessed would usher in a new era of energy independence and space travel. But he also sensed something darker, an obsession with concealment that elevated S4 above any moral or legal constraints. They weren't just hiding technology, he later reflected. They were hiding the very idea that we might not be alone. In the next chapter, we'll unpack the heart of that technology, element 115 and gravity amplification, and explore how Lazar's revelations challenge the boundaries of known physics. But for now, the walls of S4 stand silent, their secrets humming just out of reach beneath the Nevada desert. The world beneath the Nevada desert held no silence at S4, not when hidden reactors hummed with secret power, not when technicians hushed about experiments that defied every physics textbook. At the center of Bob Lazar's account lay a single exotic substance, element 115. In a lab tucked behind 3 security doors, he watched scientists handle glowing vials of a silvery metal under dim light, their face shields reflecting the soft luminescence as they whispered, "This batch has a half-life measured in days, not milliseconds. We can actually work with it." According to Lazar's diagrams, each of the 9 saucer-shaped craft in the hangar contained 3 reactor pods, and at the heart of every pod sat a crucible of element 115. Thousands of those crucibles had been produced in a clandestine reactor plant and shipped under armed escort to S4. Each sample was encased in boron-lined housing to contain stray neutrons and tagged with radio frequency identifiers. Lazar's task was to reverse engineer how these crucibles, when placed in a reactor assembly encircled by superconducting coils, could generate a gravity amplification field powerful enough to lift a 2-ton disk into the air. Gravity, as taught in any freshman physics class, is an attractive force between masses, Earth pulling downward, the moon tugging at our tides. It's the weakest of the 4 fundamental forces, and in classical terms, it cannot be switched off or redirected. Yet Lazar described how, in the reactor assembly, a stream of protons accelerated to near light speed bombarded the nucleus of element 115, forcing it into a metastable state that produced what project scientists called a negative mass effect. He likened space-time to a taut rubber sheet. Place a bowling ball on it and watch it sag. Now imagine pushing up from underneath, creating a reverse sag, a repulsive force. That, he said, was precisely what 115 did when plucked by protons, generating localized pockets of reversed gravity. Inside the top security hangar, the reactor cores sat within 3 concentric rings of superconducting coils, oversized hula hoop-like structures connected by lattices of wiring insulated with a ceramic unknown in public commerce. Technicians aligned laser-guided calibration sensors around the pods, fine-tuning the phase relationship between coils to avoid destructive interference. A misalignment of mere micrometers could destabilize the reactor, producing a sudden loss of containment and a burst of glowing particles. Lazar described it as watching controlled lightning, fields latching onto the element 115 mass, vibrating the entire assembly, then pushing the craft upward. Early tests used small-scale demonstrators, circular platforms no larger than a dinner plate, each containing a single 115 crucible and coil assembly. Precision oscillographs recorded displacement and force measurements as technicians increased neutron flux and coil current. Next came the full-scale crafts. Engineers built custom jigs around each disk and activated the reactors incrementally. Slowly, the saucers lifted, first an inch, then a foot, then several feet. During one demonstration, a disk hovered 10 feet above the floor for nearly 20 seconds, maintained by imperceptible console adjustments. Audio recordings later leaked to the public captured a deep, resonant hum, followed by a sudden whoosh. A single grainy still image, a metal disc floating in mid-bay, cables trailing below, would ignite the imagination of UFO enthusiasts worldwide. Crucially, these experiments produced no conventional exhaust, no sonic boom, no telltale heat signature. Energy waves passed directly through the surrounding air, bending it around the craft. Lazarian theory held that the negative mass effect didn't push against air or ground, but against localized distortions in space-time itself. Mainstream physicists, however, dismissed these claims as impossible. Element 115 had only ever existed in atom smashers for fractions of a second. No known reactor could produce enough stable isotopes to power sustained gravity fields. Dr. Helen Roderick, a theoretical physicist at a national lab, later reviewed Lazar's diagrams and concluded that, even assuming a stable 115 isotope, the energy required to excite its nucleus to a negative mass state would far exceed what any portable reactor could supply. It's an elegant hypothesis, but it violates conservation of energy as we understand it. Defenders argued that public science simply hadn't caught up, that secret black-budget reactors could have produced the quantities of 115 needed, and that cutting-edge physics might allow closed-loop energy recapture to offset input requirements. They pointed to buried reactor plants and unreported facilities as proof that the project's most crucial technologies lay outside civilian oversight. Beyond propulsion, Lazar glimpsed conversations about interstellar travel. He saw notebooks referencing subspace resonance and tachyon matrix stabilization, notions that sounded ripped from science fiction novels. One senior physicist told him, "If we master these local gravity fields, we can start bending space itself." Models drawn on whiteboards showed how synchronizing multiple reactor pods could, in theory, warp a bubble of space-time and ride it like a wave, allowing near-instantaneous repositioning. No prototype ever emerged, but the seeds of warp drive fantasies were sown deep within S4's sorted files. Working so close to unknown power exacted a toll. Lazar's medical evaluations logged elevated white blood cell counts and early radiation damage to his bone marrow. His dosimeter readings often flirted with safety thresholds, even during routine inspections. After one intense testing session, he returned home with a persistent ringing in his ears and a sensation that his own mass felt slightly off balance. When he was quietly rotated back to Los Alamos after roughly 3 months, Lazar left behind reactor diagrams stamped "Top Secret," code word Aquarius, and notebooks brimming with hand-drawn coil schematics. Under a windowless chamber's fluorescent lights, senior officers warned him to maintain discretion and reminded him that loyalty has its privileges and its consequences. In public lectures and interviews, he later tried to attract fellow scientists who might replicate the experiments, if only they knew where to find element 115. UFO enthusiasts hailed him as a pioneer who bridged the gap between science and the unseen, citing his technical vocabulary and first-hand observations as proof. Skeptics demanded peer-reviewed publications, independent replications, and physical samples, none of which Lazar ever produced. Decades on, mainstream physics edges closer to manipulating gravity in tiny quantum contexts, and materials science explores exotic isotopes for energy. Yet nothing in published research mirrors Lazar's descriptions. Element 115 remains a laboratory curiosity, produced in atom colliders for milliseconds, not a stable reactor fuel. Gravity control experiments persist at the fringes of academia, but no one claims to have cracked Lazar's code. If those silent reactors still hum beneath the desert, their energy awaits someone bold enough to test its power. But until then, the question remains: was Bob Lazar a visionary who glimpsed future science, or a skilled storyteller weaving half-truths and borrowed jargon into a legend that won't die? The winter of 1989 was a turning point for Bob Lazar. Until that year, his work at S4 remained hidden behind layers of clearance and code words. Then, in the quiet of a Las Vegas TV studio, he decided to go public. It began with a late-night phone call from investigative reporter George Knapp at KLAS TV. Knapp had heard rumors of a scientist saying he'd reverse-engineered alien craft. He wanted details. Lazar agreed, on one condition: anonymity. On a cold December evening, Lazar arrived at the station under the pseudonym Dennis. His voice was electronically scrambled, his face blurred by a video filter. He wore a dark jacket and spoke in a restrained, measured tone. The interviewer listened, sometimes incredulous, sometimes skeptical, but always transfixed. Lazar laid out his story. 9 saucer-shaped vehicles stored in a hidden mountain facility south of Groom Lake, each powered by a reactor fueled with element 115. He explained security protocols, the makeup of the reactor coils, even the secret airstrip used to ferry personnel and materials in and out. The clip aired at 11:30 p.m., reaching a modest local audience, but word spread fast. Within days, the story exploded. Unsolicited faxes poured into the KLAS newsroom, urging follow-up. UFO fan forums lit up with speculation. National newspapers picked up the wire stories. Lazar's voice, even distorted, carried enough technical detail to lend gravitas. He wasn't a kook claiming to have seen little green men. He spoke of calipers and oscilloscopes, neutron flux and superconducting coils. Listeners heard terms like negative mass effect and subspace resonance, and realized this wasn't your grandmother's UFO tale. The next logical step was a face-to-face interview. Knapp arranged a sit-down at a studio in Las Vegas, this time with Lazar's real name on the marquee. As Lazar settled under bright lights, he removed the scrambler and spoke candidly. He recounted the protocols for entering S4, how guards confiscated watches and wallets, how his badge scan logged every step. He described the look of the hangar floor, polished concrete, how the craft sat on tripods, the way their reactor cores pulsed like glowing hearts. He even sketched diagrams on a whiteboard, pointing to concentric coil rings and control modules. The footage aired on a Sunday night news program. Viewers were transfixed. Letters came in by the thousands, some praising Lazar as a brave whistleblower, others denouncing him as a fraud. Late-night talk shows seized on the topic. Comedians joked about Area 51 and alien cargo cults. Conspiracy theorists saw validation. Mainstream skeptics saw a con artist bailed out by sensational media. Yet beneath the babble, a serious debate took root. Could any government maintain such a massive secret involving dozens, if not hundreds, of top clearance scientists and technicians without a single whistle or leaked document? Government agencies scrambled. The Air Force released a statement. There was no facility named S4, no records of a project involving alien spacecraft. The Department of Energy searched its Los Alamos files. No scientist named Lazar ever held clearance there. The Defense Intelligence Agency responded with curt denials. Press officers insisted that any true national security program would never allow public disclosures of that detail, but their blanket statements only fueled the frenzy. If they could so easily dismiss his existence, skeptics argued, what else might they erase? Journalists dug into Lazar's background. They checked Florida school records and found no evidence of National Science Fair awards. They contacted MIT and Caltech. Both institutions reported no enrollment under Lazar's name. Headlines proclaimed, "No transcript, no truth," and "Academic hoax or classified cover-up." Lazar's supporters countered that classified projects would remove all trace of employment and academic history. They pointed to his apparent fluency with advanced physics and insisted that only someone with serious training could discuss tensor equations and quantum field effects so fluidly on camera. Amid the swirl of media attention, Lazar struggled to maintain his focus. He received death threats and crank calls. His phone line, once unremarkable, became a hotline for curiosity seekers and conspiracy buffs. Reporters trailed him outside his modest home in New Mexico. Federal agents were rumored to stake out his neighborhood, watching for moments when he removed trash or picked up his morning paper. At UFO conventions, he was hailed as a hero. At university lectures, his story was dismissed out of hand. Everywhere he turned, the glare of publicity cast him alternately as liberator and lunatic. In private conversations, Lazar grew frustrated with the binary narrative. He wanted to be judged on technical merits, not on whether he fit believers or skeptics' expectations. He began releasing more detailed interview transcripts and diagrams to select journalists, hoping that concrete data would shift the debate. Yet the more he revealed, the more scrutiny his material attracted. Physicists pored over his reactor schematics and asserted they violated conservation laws. Others noted that every test video had gaps, missing frames, sudden cuts, inexplicable camera tilts. To many, the evidence was too thin, too fragmented to prove the extraordinary claim. The turning point came when a small group of independent researchers, calling themselves the Lazar Project, traveled to the Nevada desert. They scouted public dirt roads, staked out fenced perimeters, and filmed night vision footage of distant lights over the restricted Groom Lake area. Their documentary, released a year later, juxtaposed Lazar's interview clips with their own grainy footage. Though it offered no smoking gun proof, it spurred renewed interest and pointed to the possibility that something was hidden deep in the desert. Meanwhile, major media outlets began to temper their coverage. They layered skeptical expert commentary over Lazar's clips, highlighting the absence of physical samples or peer-reviewed papers. Newspapers ran op-eds titled "Chasing Shadows at S4," questioning whether reporters had been too credulous. Academics wrote rebuttals in science journals. "Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence," they reminded readers. For every person convinced that Lazar had cracked open government vaults, 10 more saw a cautionary tale of how airtight secrecy can breed rumors. By the early 1990s, the initial frenzy had subsided into a persistent background hum. Lazar continued giving interviews, appearing at UFO conferences, even founding a small electronics business to make ends meet. He spoke of the personal cost. "I lost friends, I lost privacy, I lost any hope of a normal life," he told one interviewer. "But I still believe I saw what I saw, and I'm still waiting for someone to show me I'm wrong." Over time, a curious balance emerged. Lazar's story remained a fixture in UFO lore, cited in documentaries and books, referenced whenever Area 51 made headlines. Yet the scientific establishment treated it as a footnote, a fascinating anomaly, but not a credible breakthrough. Government spokespeople fell silent, neither confirming nor acknowledging Lazar's claims, implicitly allowing the mystery to fester. In retrospect, the 1989 expose did more than thrust Lazar into the spotlight. It transformed public perception of Area 51 itself. No longer was it merely a test site for experimental aircraft. It became shorthand for hidden alien technology, a cultural icon of governmental secrecy and cosmic conspiracy. Visitors flocked to Rachel, Nevada, to glimpse the alien highway. UFO museums displayed muck-raked press clippings and Lazar memorabilia. His interviews, once late-night curiosities, became legendary recordings, studied and dissected at UFO symposiums. Yet the essential question remained unanswered. Did Bob Lazar truly reverse engineer alien propulsion, or was he a masterful storyteller exploiting America's hunger for mystery? In the years that followed, both camps would scour declassified documents and pursue Freedom of Information requests, hoping to unearth a definitive truth. But the deeper they dug, the more obscured the records became. Redactions upon redactions, references to Project Aquarius hidden by code words, blank pages where contract numbers should have been. As the 1990s gave way to the new millennium, Lazar's 1989 interview endured as the cornerstone of his legend. It captured a moment when one man dared to peel back the veil on classified science, and the world watched, fascinated and divided. Whatever the reality, the expose reshaped the conversation about government secrecy, advanced technology, and the possibility that humanity's greatest discoveries might lie hidden in plain sight. Bob Lazar's life shifted beneath a relentless spotlight. No longer was he the quiet engineer maneuvering among humming reactors hidden in Nevada's desert. He was the man whose name echoed in UFO forums, late-night talk shows, and tabloid headlines. After the 1989 expose, every aspect of his existence felt subject to scrutiny and speculation. Not long after his televised interviews, Lazar left behind the tight security of S4 for a house in Kingman, Arizona. The move promised anonymity, but that hope quickly evaporated. Reporters staked out his driveway at dawn, and local UFO buffs knocked on his door with video cameras. He installed a chain-link fence and motion-sensitive lights, only to find them triggering flashbulbs from persistent trespassers. He hired a private investigator to follow those who filmed his comings and goings, but the harassing calls and flying drones continued, day and night. Seeking some measure of normalcy, Lazar launched an electronics repair shop in nearby Pahrump, Nevada. He advertised services for everything from stereo systems to security camera installations. The storefront, modest and unassuming, bore a weathered sign, Lazar Electronics. Word spread fast that this was the place to bring malfunctioning equipment, and curious visitors arrived daily. Some dropped off broken radios, others arrived with conspiracy-laden requests. Can you tune this to pick up secret base communications? Employees at the shop recall Lazar patiently explaining that his specialty was soldering circuits, not intercepting classified transmissions. Yet he humored the queries, sometimes sketching diagrams of coil assemblies on napkins while assuring customers he couldn't help them hack military frequencies. Meanwhile, Lazar continued to speak at UFO conventions across the Southwest. On stage, he cut a lean figure in a dark suit and wire-rimmed glasses. Behind him, banners displayed grainy images of flying saucers and the legend Witness to S4. He narrated his experiences with clipped precision, often pausing to let murmurs ripple through the audience. At one gathering in Las Vegas, after recounting the first time he saw a saucer hover above the hangar floor, he stepped back and watched as the crowd hushed, hanging on his every word. He resisted self-aggrandizement, avoiding dramatic flourishes in favor of technical descriptions, reactor pods, superconducting coils, neutron bombardment. He wanted listeners to see him as a scientist, not a showman. Even so, convention life carried its own strains. Hotel lobbies filled with self-styled experts, each more boisterous than the last. Between talks, Lazar retreated to his room to review his notes, only to find envelopes stuffed under his door, fan mail, hate mail, and draft subpoenas from amateur research groups demanding proof of his security clearance. He learned to travel under an alias, booking flights with a friend's name to avoid airport confrontations. TSA agents eyed him curiously, asking whether he had clearance for unusual equipment. He'd produce a generic business card and claim to be installing remote monitoring systems in Phoenix. Financial pressures mounted. The repair shop barely covered rent, and speaking fees were modest once word spread that Lazar's revelations offered little new material. He tried consulting for a small tech startup exploring advanced propulsion concepts, but after a few weeks the company dissolved. Investors balked at the murky reputational risks of hiring a controversial UFO figure. Still, Lazar persisted. He published a short, self-funded pamphlet outlining his theories on element 115 and gravity amplification, circulating it among sympathetic physicists and conspiracy culture newsletters. He'd hoped the pamphlet would spark academic interest. Instead, it drew more ridicule than inquiry. At home, Lazar's personal life felt the fallout. Neighbors whispered about the strange lights at his house. His marriage strained under the pressure of constant intrusion. Even family vacations required intensive planning. He hired off-duty security to patrol the rental cabin perimeter, and he refused to leave any electronic devices behind for fear of tampering. Once, on a trip to the Grand Canyon, his car was keyed overnight. The word S4 scraped into the side panel. He filed a police report but received no leads. Despite the difficulties, Lazar never recanted. In private phone calls, later transcribed and leaked, he complained about being used by media that sought sensational headlines, yet he acknowledged that without their platform, his story would have vanished. He understood the double edge of publicity. It amplified his voice, but also magnified every misstep. He once confided to a fellow speaker at a convention, "I want the world to see the science, not the circus." For Lazar, the greatest frustration lay in the gap between what he knew in those secretive hangars and what the public would believe. His relationship with mainstream scientists remained cold. He sent detailed schematics to several university physics departments, hoping to ignite peer-reviewed research. Most remained responsive. A handful replied with polite rejections, citing lack of verifiable samples. At one point, a leading journal agreed to consider an article on his propulsion theory, but only if he could provide raw data from S4. The request spelled the end of the attempt. Without access to classified measurements, Lazar could only offer his recollections and hand-drawn diagrams. The academic door slammed shut. Undeterred, Lazar embraced new mediums. In the mid-1990s, he launched a website, one of the first UFO-related pages on the early internet, posting scanned copies of media interviews, declassified FOIA letters, and photos of his repair shop storefront. The site became a hub for believers, skeptics, and trolls alike. Comment threads ranged from earnest technical debates about neutron flux to conspiracy talk about secret government cover-ups. Lazar watched it evolve from a personal archive into a sprawling online community. He even hired a webmaster to moderate comments and organize meetups near Area 51's perimeter. By the early 2000s, Lazar's identity had solidified in UFO lore. Documentaries like Dreamland and Area 51, The Alien Interview treated him as a central figure, reenacting his claims with actors and CGI. Lazar himself shunned on-camera appearances for those projects, preferring voiceover contributions behind closed doors. He learned to guard his image, allowing producers to film his voice in dimly lit booths and masking his home address with digital blurs. In quieter moments, Lazar reflected on how secrecy had shaped him. He told a friend that the classification protocols of S4 mirrored the isolation he now lived. Always half in the shadows, always under watch. At UFO gatherings, he'd sometimes linger after his formal talk, speaking one-on-one with attendees who showed genuine curiosity rather than conspiracy obsession. Those conversations sustained him, discussions about potential peaceful uses of gravity control or the ethics of classified research. He believed that if the science were real, it could revolutionize energy and travel for humanity's benefit, not just military advantage. Still, periodic controversies kept him in the spotlight. When a self-published insider memoir surfaced, claiming Lazar was coached by intelligence officers, he publicly denounced it as pure fabrication. When alleged leaked documents naming him as a consultant on reverse engineering projects circulated online, he responded with a terse statement. No such contract exists in any unclassified archive. Each response sparked waves of discussion as new audiences discovered his name alongside rumors and denials. Throughout the years, Lazar traded the sterile confines of Black Ops labs for a different kind of confinement. The narrow expectations of a world that either idolized or vilified him. He learned to accept that his story would never reach a clear, universally recognized resolution. And yet he still held fast to the belief that one day, physicists would revisit his claims, armed with fresh data and unbound by government secrecy. In the end, Lazar's aftermath was defined by paradox. He gained a platform to share his knowledge, yet he lost the freedom to live without surveillance. He spoke publicly of groundbreaking science, yet he struggled to find collaborators who would take his theories seriously. He became a legend in UFO culture, but a footnote in academic journals. And through it all, he remained determined to bridge the chasm between his underground experiences and the world above. crowded lecture halls, the flooded inboxes, the constant media scrutiny, they were the price he paid for stepping forward. Lazar never stopped waiting for proof to catch up with his words. Day after day, year after year, he kept telling his story, hoping that someday someone would hear not the sensationalist hype, but the scientific challenge buried within. And in that persistence, he found a purpose: to shine a light into the classified shadows, even if that light came at the cost of his own peace. Long before Bob Lazar's name became synonymous with alien spacecraft and reverse-engineered gravity drives, Area 51 was a footnote in aviation history, an isolated test range for experimental jets. By the mid-1990s, however, Lazar's revelations had reshaped public perception. No longer was Groom Lake simply the site of black-budget prototypes. It became the ultimate symbol of hidden technology and extraterrestrial secrets. Reporters who had once described the base as a dry lake bed used for high-altitude reconnaissance tests now led their stories with Lazar's testimony. Headlines shifted from U-2 spy plane trials to suspected UFO hangar discovered. Tourism surrounding the tiny town of Rachel, Nevada boomed. Gift shops stocked Area 51 t-shirts emblazoned with saucer silhouettes, and motel walls were plastered with grainy photos of desert fences under moonlight. Lazar's story permeated pop culture. Video games, comic books, late-night talk shows, and even theme park attractions cited his claims as inspiration. Hollywood followed suit. In 1997, Men in Black opened with the ominous warning, "No one will believe you," echoing Lazar's own admonitions about secrecy. The film's depiction of shadowy government agents corralling alien artifacts felt like a wink to anyone who knew Lazar's saga. A year later, The X-Files aired the episode Jose Chung's From Outer Space, which playfully referenced a whistleblower known only as Dennis. Fans recognized the homage immediately. These nods weren't mere Easter eggs. They reflected how deeply Lazar's narrative had threaded itself into the collective imagination. UFO conventions adopted him as a cornerstone. Each year, thousands gathered at venues from Roswell, New Mexico to Sedona, Arizona, to hear updates on Lazar's claims. Panels titled Beyond Area 51 or The Legacy of Element 115 drew packed rooms. In merchandising halls, vendors sold models of saucer replicas based on Lazar's sketches, complete with concentric coil rings and mini reactor pods. A handful of small publishers released coffee table books with titles like Secrets of S4 and Alien Engineering Exposed, positioning Lazar's story alongside classic UFO lore. Academic and skeptical communities, meanwhile, dissected his impact. In 2002, a media studies professor published an analysis titled Area 51 as Myth, From Military Secret to Pop Culture Phenomenon, arguing that Lazar's narrative had catalyzed a shift from government distrust to outright belief in alien cover-ups. Anthropologists studying conspiracy theories pointed to Lazar as a textbook case of how a single testimony could transform a place into a legendary site. They noted that Area 51 web searches spiked by over 1,000% after Lazar's 1989 interview, effectively crowdsourcing the myth. Within ufology circles, debates about Lazar's credibility grew intense. Devotees argued that his technical fluency, his diagrams, equations, and detailed descriptions set him apart from fanciful eyewitnesses. They pointed to the precision of his dimensional measurements, the exact diameter of a craft's hull, the thickness of reactor shielding, the spacing of coil windings. To believers, these specifics suggested genuine insider knowledge. Skeptics countered that such detail could be gleaned from open-source materials, declassified patents, academic papers on superconductivity, and news articles on experimental propulsion. They argued that Lazar's diagrams echoed 1960s journal articles on magnetic levitation, and that his references to neutron generators were hardly alien. In online forums, technical threads parsed every line of Lazar's published pamphlet, hunting for contradictions or borrowings from existing literature. The rise of the internet further amplified these debates. Enthusiast websites devoted entire sections to cataloging sighting reports near Groom Lake, cross-referenced with satellite imagery and government documents obtained via Freedom of Information Act requests. Forums hosted crowdsourced investigations, with members mapping out security fences and infrared satellite tracks in attempts to locate the elusive S4 entrances. Lazar's early web pages, once rudimentary HTML, became templates for sophisticated conspiratorial archives. These developments caught the attention of defense and intelligence analysts. A 2004 internal report, later leaked, examined how UFO myths, including Lazar's claims, could influence public perception of real classified programs. The analysts noted that conflating experimental aircraft like the F-117 Nighthawk and the RQ-170 Sentinel with alien technology helped obscure genuine breakthroughs under layers of sensationalism. In effect, Lazar's story served as both a recruitment tool for UFO enthusiasts and an accidental cover story for the Pentagon. Mainstream journalists occasionally revisited the story, often around Area 51's annual Storm Area 51 meme in 2019. Even then, Lazar's name surfaced repeatedly. Articles in major outlets range from affectionate retrospectives to hard-nosed investigations, and each time they rekindled interest in S4. Late-night hosts quipped about Bob Lazar facts and shooting lasers into space. The humor underscored how deeply embedded the story had become. Yet for all its cultural reach, Lazar's legacy remained contested territory. In 2013, a biography published under the title Dreamland painted him as both hero and opportunist, portraying Lazar as driven less by cosmic wonder than by a desire for recognition. Lazar responded by calling the book wildly speculative and threatening legal action, though no lawsuit followed. A year later, a group of independent researchers published what they called the Lazar Report, claiming to have uncovered new documents on Element 115 production facilities. The report garnered headlines, but was swiftly dismissed when the documents proved unverifiable. By the 2020s, Lazar's narrative had entered the standard canon of UFO literature. University courses on modern mythology included a module on Bob Lazar and the making of Area 51. Documentaries on streaming platforms featured interviews with Lazar alongside skeptics, presenting balanced investigations that nonetheless highlighted the enduring allure of his claims. A common refrain emerged: whether one believed Lazar or not, his story raised essential questions about transparency, scientific ethics, and the boundary between government secrecy and public right to know. The ripple effects reached further still. Amateur astronomers, inspired by Lazar's technical language, began experimenting with small-scale levitation rigs using superconducting magnets and cryogenic cooling. None achieved free flight, but several teams published their efforts in niche engineering journals, crediting Lazar for inspiring their curiosity. Aerospace startups exploring electric and ion propulsion cited gravity control as the ultimate goal, even if they conceded it lay far beyond current technology. In the realm of entertainment, Lazar's influence persisted. Video games featured secret military bases housing alien craft. Podcasts revisited his interviews with fresh commentary. Social media influencers streamed visits to Area 51's perimeter gates, waving Lazar's diagrams at the camera. Each new retelling added another layer to the myth, blending fact, speculation, and showmanship until the original tale became inseparable from its many iterations. At its core, Lazar's cultural legacy illustrates how a single testimony, delivered with technical confidence and narrative flair, can reshape a place and a discourse. S4 may never be found, and Element 115 may remain a footnote in nuclear physics experiments, but the idea he planted of a hidden hangar humming with alien power has taken on a life of its own. In the collective imagination, Area 51 is more than a laboratory. It is a mirror reflecting our hopes, fears, and the eternal question of whether we stand alone in the universe. Bob Lazar's story rests on a fragile balance between technical detail and unverified claims, and over the decades, both sides have amassed a body of evidence, some supportive, much skeptical, leaving the truth caught between testimony and tangible proof. On one hand, Lazar offered intricate descriptions of underground hangars, reactor modules humming with power, and the precise geometry of saucer-shaped craft. On the other, critics highlight missing records, impossible material properties, and an absence of physical artifacts. Among the strongest pieces of supporting testimony are the recollections of a handful of former defense contractors and engineers who recall hearing about a special project in the mid-1980s involving exotic materials. In interviews conducted by UFO researchers, One retired technician from a Nevada subcontractor described unmarked deliveries of unusual metal containers to a remote airstrip, a delivery schedule that loosely coincided with Lazar's reported tenure. He couldn't confirm the contents, but he remembered security so tight that drivers were prohibited from talking to each other until after the drop. This anecdote aligns with Lazar's account of armed convoys moving crucibles of element 115 to the S4 site. Then there are the declassified Blue Book files and formerly top-secret procurement logs obtained via Freedom of Information Act requests. In those logs, researchers found references to contracts with small Nevada-based firms for advanced materials testing and gravity modulation research. The contracts were heavily redacted, but budget figures ran into the tens of millions of dollars. Skeptics note that advanced materials could include everything from stealth coatings to new alloys, nothing inherently extraterrestrial. But to those who believe Lazar, the timing and secrecy are telling. Perhaps the most intriguing artifact is a grainy black and white photograph that surfaced in the early 1990s, showing a round metallic object partially obscured by an open blast door carved into a mountainside. The image, scooped up by conspiracy magazines, bears a striking resemblance to models of the craft Lazar described. Skeptics dismiss it as a prop from an enthusiast's film shoot or even a weathered ventilation port, yet forensic analysts at a private lab couldn't definitively tie it to any known facility. The origin remains a mystery, and that ambiguity helps fuel ongoing debate. On the scientific front, Lazar's descriptions of element 115 sparked specialized inquiry. In 2004, a team of nuclear chemists managed to synthesize minuscule quantities of ununpentium, now officially named moscovium, in a particle accelerator. The newly created isotope decayed in less than a second, confirming mainstream predictions of extreme instability. This outcome directly contradicts Lazar's claims of a stable isotope with a half-life measured in days. When those findings were published in a peer-reviewed journal, they represented the consensus view. 115 cannot exist in any appreciable working quantity under known physical laws. Yet Lazar supporters counter that public accelerators lack the secret reactor designs he witnessed, reactors capable of stabilizing heavy nuclei through processes not yet disclosed. They argue that standard accelerator labs would never be permitted to replicate black-budget facilities capable of producing high-yield isotopes. In essence, they maintain that mainstream science is simply chasing a moving target, barred by classification, rather than constrained by physical law. Another scientific challenge comes from Lazar's gravity control theory itself. He described a negative mass effect generated by proton bombardment of 115, but rigorous tests of negative mass analogs in laboratory settings have consistently shown that any repulsive gravitational phenomena would require energy levels several orders of magnitude beyond what Lazar's reactors purportedly produced. Dr. Elena Voss, a physicist specializing in gravitational research, reviewed Lazar's hand-drawn schematics and concluded that even under optimistic projections, the power-to-thrust ratio is implausible. You simply cannot derive lift from a device of that size without some form of reaction mass or energy exhaust, she noted. That line of critique extends to the absence of exhaust plumes or sound signatures in Lazar's own testimony. Conventional propulsion systems release energy, whether as gas expelled or electromagnetic radiation. Lazar's accounts insist there was no visible exhaust, no audible roar, yet multiple leaked audio recordings of alleged tests include faint hissing and intermittent electrical arcing sounds. Some analysts suggest those recordings could be from auxiliary systems, air compressors, cooling pumps, rather than the core drive itself. But the inconsistency between no exhaust claims and recordings of ambient lab noise raises questions about whether the tests unfolded as Lazar described. On the documentary side, journalist George Knapp's early interviews with Lazar remain a cornerstone. Knapp's reputation as a serious investigative reporter lends weight to the tapes, and he has stood by Lazar's credibility, emphasizing Lazar's calm demeanor and technical fluency under pressure. Yet even Knapp admits he could not corroborate Lazar's background independently. He once remarked, "I trusted what I saw on camera, an articulate, detailed account, but I never got my hands on hard data." That confession epitomizes the dilemma, convincing storytelling paired with no physical evidence. Government responses have generally followed a pattern of denial or silence. Air Force spokespeople issued statements that no facility named S4 existed and that no records tie Lazar to any clearance at Los Alamos. The Department of Energy reported no scientist by his name in its archives. In conspiracy circles, these denials are interpreted as classic disinformation or misdirection. In academic ones, they're cited as confirmation that the claims lack foundation. The back and forth nature of these denials has only deepened the divide. Believers see cover up, skeptics see conclusive refutation. Then there's the human dimension. Bob Lazar's personality and consistency have been dissected by psychologists studying belief systems. Some experts view Lazar as a genuine believer in his own experiences, perhaps unconsciously conflating expectation with memory. Others see him as a skillful raconteur exploiting demand for sensational narratives. His private writings, partially leaked to the public, show meticulous diagramming of reactors and cogent summaries of meeting notes, details that argue against simple fabrication. Yet no one has unearthed a smoking gun document, no signed project briefing, no chain of custody log for an actual 115 sample, nothing to definitively settle the matter. Finally, the question of secrecy remains potent. If Lazar's story is false, it required an elaborate charade. Dozens of technicians, secure facilities, armed escorts, and erased records, all orchestrated for a single man's benefit. If his story is true, it means a massive, multi-decade government cover-up advanced by the most sophisticated scientific minds, unanswered by whistleblowers or investigative journalists until Lazar stepped forward. Both scenarios stretch credulity in their own ways. As the debate stands, perhaps the most lasting takeaway is that Lazar's narrative forced society to confront the limits of open research and classified secrecy. It ignited conversations about whether certain scientific frontiers should remain hidden or if transparency is paramount in a democratic society. It reminded physicists that public trust is fragile when breakthroughs are rumored but unverified. And it underscored a simple truth: extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. And in the case of Bob Lazar, that proof remains elusive. Whether Lazar emerges as a misunderstood pioneer or a consummate storyteller, the evidence and the skepticism continue to shape his legacy. His story lives on in redacted documents, whispered testimonies, grainy photos, and heated debates. An enduring reminder that sometimes the line between fact and fiction is as slippery as the desert dust swirling around a hidden hangar door. In the years since Bob Lazar first spoke of hidden hangars and humming reactors, his story has become synonymous with secrecy and the tantalizing possibility of extraterrestrial technology. Whether he stood at the edge of a scientific revolution or spun the most elaborate of yarns, his narrative forced a reckoning with questions too long buried under layers of classification and rumor. Governments classify information to protect national security, but at what point does that secrecy become its own kind of lock? One that bars not just foreign adversaries, but the public itself from understanding our collective future. Lazar's tale, true or not, highlighted how classification can obscure science, stifle inquiry, and leave even genuine breakthroughs shrouded in doubt. The very notion that gravity might be manipulated at will, once relegated to science fiction, took on new urgency when framed as the clandestine work of top-secret labs. At the same time, his saga demonstrated the modern culture's hunger for mystery. In a world where nearly everything is documented, cataloged, and streamed live online, the idea of a place so secret that it disappears from records and erases the identities of those who enter feels exotic and irresistible. Listeners, readers, and viewers around the globe found in Lazar's account a mirror of their own anxieties. Are we alone? What is the government hiding? And if unimaginable power exists, who gets to wield it? Those questions persist today. In classified vaults and secure data centers, research continues on directed energy weapons, advanced propulsion systems, even nascent quantum communication networks. Yet the public rarely sees the true scope of these programs. Instead, we rely on whistleblowers, leaked memos, and the occasional declassified report to piece together the story. Bob Lazar was among the first to bridge that gap with a direct, if disputed, testimony. His experience at S4 gave him a unique vantage point into the tension between cutting-edge science and the imperative of secrecy. For advocates of transparency, his narrative remains emblematic. If revolutionary discoveries are locked behind top-secret stamps, society may never benefit from them. Clean energy sources, safer transportation, breakthroughs in medicine, all could languish in hiding. Lazar often said that his motivation wasn't fame or money, but a belief that the technology he saw could improve lives. Whether he truly witnessed that technology or simply imagined it, the impulse to share it spoke to a deeper truth. Scientific knowledge thrives only when it's allowed into the light. Critics, meanwhile, caution against the unchecked spread of unverified claims. They warn that in the absence of hard evidence, stories like Lazar's can mislead, distract from genuine science, and erode trust in institutions that rely on peer review and reproducibility. They point out that every extraordinary claim must be grounded in verifiable data, and that without it, even the most compelling narrative risks becoming myth. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of Lazar's story is that the boundary between fact and fiction often hinges on documentation and access. A single signed memo, a declassified engineering report, or a vial of the very element he described could transform speculation into science. But in the absence of such proof, his account inhabits a twilight zone, half-remembered testimony, grainy photos, and redacted contracts circling in public archives. In the years since his interviews, academic researchers and private engineers have continued to explore gravity control in limited ways, using superconductors, laser interferometry, and quantum sensors. But nothing has emerged that matches Lazar's boldest claims. Element 115 remains an exotic footnote in nuclear chemistry, produced in minute-fleeting quantities and studied only in the world's largest particle colliders. The dream of a reactor that plucks space-time like a guitar string persists in theoretical papers and underground labs, but it has yet to materialize. Still, the conversation has shifted, where once the idea of bending gravity would have been dismissed outright, it's now the subject of serious inquiry in a handful of specialized journals. Space agencies and private companies fund research into inertial mass manipulation, probing the outer edges of physics. Even if Lazar's specific story proves unfounded, he ignited a spark, a willingness to ask, what if, that continues to push scientific boundaries. As for Lazar himself, he faded from the mainstream spotlight, but never from the undercurrents of UFO and fringe science communities. He lives privately now, occasionally resurfacing to update his website or grant an interview, always careful to stick to the technical details he knows and sidestep the sensationalism others try to attach to his name. His legacy, finally, is one of questions rather than answers. So where does that leave us? Standing in the desert dusk, looking toward a mountain where a hidden hangar may or may not lie, we grapple with conflicting impulses: to trust the carefully vetted knowledge of academic science and to remain open to possibilities that exceed today's understanding. Bob Lazar's story is a reminder that history is shaped by those willing to challenge conventions, and that breakthroughs can come from the margins, where curiosity meets courage. In the end, the real power lies not in the secrets we keep, but in the questions we dare to ask. And if we carry forward the spirit of inquiry Lazar embodied, balanced by rigorous demand for evidence, we might one day pierce the veil, whether it hides alien reactors or simply unexplored frontiers of our own technology. The desert winds will keep whispering through the rocky passes, and somewhere, behind a steel blast door, the hum of possibility endures, waiting for someone bold enough to listen.